There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard, but from the certainty that no matter how much you give, it will never be enough. Giulia lived with that exhaustion. She wasn't running from her past. She was running toward a future that seemed just out of reach. A future where she could finally breathe, where she could finally rest, until a ruthless billionaire walked into her life and showed her that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't falling, it's landing in the arms of someone who refuses to let you go. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The calf smelled of espresso and burnt sugar, a scent Giulia had memorized after 3 years of opening shifts. It was 5:47 a.m., and the December cold pressed against the windows like an unwanted visitor. She moved through the pre-dawn routine with practiced efficiency, grinding beans, steaming milk pitchers, arranging pastries in the display case with hands that trembled slightly from lack of sleep. She'd already worked her overnight shift at the hospital, cleaning rooms from midnight to 5. Her nursing school classes started at 2 in the afternoon. The calf shift filled the gap, filled her bank account with just enough to keep the lights on in her tiny studio apartment and her mother's medication bottles full. 23 years old, and Giulia felt ancient. She caught her reflection in the espresso machine's polished chrome, dark circles under hazel eyes, chestnut hair pulled into a messy bun. The same black polo shirt and jeans she wore every morning. She looked tired. She was tired. But tired didn't pay bills, didn't finish degrees, didn't save mothers from illness. So she smiled when the first customer walked through the door at 6 a.m. sharp, like she did every morning. Except this morning, it wasn't the usual construction workers or bleary-eyed commuters. This morning, it was him. Giulia noticed the shoes first, hand-stitched Italian leather, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent. Then the charcoal wool coat, perfectly tailored, expensive enough to be understated. Her gaze traveled up and froze. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of presence that made the small calf feel smaller. Sharp jawline, dark hair swept back with casual precision, eyes the color of espresso, intense and unreadable. Mid-30s, she guessed. The kind of man who belonged in boardrooms and penthouse suites, not a struggling calf in a forgotten corner of the city. "Buongiorno," he said, and his voice was low, controlled, with the faintest hint of an Italian accent that made the word sound like velvet. Giulia's breath caught. She forced herself to focus, to be professional. "Good morning. What can I get you?" He studied the menu board with an attention that seemed excessive for coffee choices. Or maybe he was studying her. She couldn't tell. "Doppio espresso," he said finally. "And whatever you recommend for breakfast." "The cornetto is fresh," Giulia offered, already reaching for the espresso portafilter. "We make them here, then I'll trust your judgment." Something about the way he said trust made her hands shake slightly as she tamped the coffee grounds. She could feel his eyes on her, not leering, not uncomfortable, just observing with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every movement. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Giulia plated a cornetto with practiced care, added a small dish of honey on the side, the way her nana had taught her. Presentation matters, even in small things. When she turned back, he was still watching her. $12, she said, sliding the order across the counter. He handed her a 50 without breaking eye contact. "Keep the change." Giulia blinked. "That's a $38 tip for a $12 order." "I know." The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. "You look like you could use it." Pride flared in her chest, hot and immediate. "I'm not a charity case. I didn't say you were." He picked up the espresso cup, his fingers long and elegant, the kind of hands that had never done manual labor. "I said, you look tired. There's a difference." Before Julia could respond, he'd taken his breakfast to a corner table by the window and pulled out a leather portfolio, effectively dismissing her. She stood there for a moment, torn between irritation and curiosity, before the door chimed again and the morning rush began. But throughout the chaos of orders and small talk and steam-frothed milk, she found her gaze drifting to the corner table. He stayed for an hour, working through papers with focused intensity, occasionally sipping the espresso she'd made. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her again. And when he finally left, he did so without a word, leaving behind an empty cup and a business card placed precisely in the center of the table. Julia waited until the rush died down before walking over. The card was thick, expensive stock, embossed letters in dark charcoal. Matteo Costa, Chief Executive Officer. Costa International Holdings, and handwritten on the back in elegant script, "When you're ready to stop running, call me." Julia's heart hammered against her ribs. She should throw it away, should forget the expensive stranger with the intense eyes and the ridiculous tip, should focus on her 3 jobs and her nursing degree and her mother's medical bills. Instead, she slipped the card into her apron pocket and tried to ignore how it felt like she'd just accepted a challenge she didn't understand. Matteo came back the next morning at 6 a.m. And the morning after that, and the one after that. Always the same order: doppio espresso, cornetto, whatever she recommended. Always the same corner table, always working through papers with that focused intensity that made Julia wonder what kind of empire required so much attention. He never spoke beyond the order, never lingered when she brought his coffee, never mentioned the business card or the cryptic message. But on the 5th morning, when Julia's hands shook so badly from exhaustion that she nearly dropped his espresso cup, he broke the pattern. "When did you last sleep?" His voice cut through her fog of fatigue. Julia set the cup down carefully, proud that her voice didn't waver. "I sleep. That's not what I asked." She met his eyes, those dark espresso eyes that seemed to see too much. "Why do you care?" "I don't like watching people destroy themselves." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "Especially not talented people. You don't know anything about me. I know you work here from 6 to noon. I know you have textbooks in your bag, medical terminology, which means nursing school. I know you wear the same clothes 3 days in a row, which means you're doing laundry once a week to save money. I know you take every extra shift your manager offers, which means you're desperate for hours." Julia's cheeks flushed, anger and embarrassment warring in her chest. "So you've been watching me. That's not impressive, it's creepy." "I've been observing," Matteo corrected, his tone maddeningly calm. "There's a difference. And what I observe is a woman who's working herself into an early grave for reasons she thinks are noble, but are actually just self-destructive. You have no idea what my reasons are. Then tell me." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit. Talk to me. I'm working. The cafe is empty. Sit." Julia wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away from this arrogant stranger who thought $50 tips gave him the right to judge her life choices. But her feet hurt, her back ached, and something about his steady gaze made her feel like maybe, just maybe, someone actually wanted to listen. She sat. Matteo waited, patient, giving her space to begin. My mother has lupus, Giulia said finally, the words coming out rougher than she intended. The medications cost more than her insurance covers. I'm in nursing school, which means I can't work full-time, which means I work 3 part-time jobs to cover the gap. I'll graduate in 6 months, get a real nursing job, and then things will be better. I just have to make it 6 more months. 6 months of running yourself into the ground. 6 months of doing what needs to be done. She lifted her chin, defiant. Not everyone has the luxury of sleeping 8 hours a night. No, Matteo agreed quietly. But everyone has the luxury of accepting help when it's offered. Giulia laughed, bitter and tired. Let me guess. You're offering to help, out of the goodness of your heart. No. His honesty surprised her. Out of self-interest. I need someone I can trust. Someone with medical knowledge. Someone who understands discretion. And you need money and time to finish your degree. I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Giulia's voice was cautious, suspicious. Matteo leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. My father had a stroke 6 months ago. He refuses to hire a traditional nurse. Refuses to admit he needs help. But he needs someone to monitor his medications, check his vitals, make sure he's following his recovery protocol. Someone who doesn't feel like a nurse. Someone who could pass as a companion. A family friend. You want me to be a fake family friend who secretly nurses your father. I want to pay you $3,000 a week to spend evenings and weekends at my family's estate, ensuring my father doesn't kill himself through stubbornness and pride. Giulia's breath caught. $3,000 a week. That was more than all 3 of her jobs combined. That was her mother's medications covered, her tuition paid, her debts cleared. That was too good to be true. What's the catch? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No catch. Matteo pulled a folded document from his portfolio, slid it across the table. Employment contract. Standard terms. Confidentiality agreement. Background check required. You'd work Friday evening through Sunday night, 20 hours a week. The rest of your time is yours to study, sleep, whatever you need. Giulia stared at the paper like it might bite her. Why me? You could hire an actual private nurse, someone with experience, someone who isn't barely passing their pharmacology class, because actual private nurses feel like medical professionals. You feel like a person. Matteo's expression softened, just slightly. My father needs to feel like a person, not a patient. And I think you understand that better than someone with 20 years of experience and no concept of what it's like to fight for dignity while everything falls apart. The words hit too close to home. Giulia thought of her mother, proud and stubborn, refusing to admit how much the illness had stolen from her. I need to think about it, she said. Take the weekend. Matteo stood, buttoning his coat with practiced efficiency. But Giulia? Stop running long enough to see when someone's trying to help you catch your breath. He left before she could ask how he knew her name. She didn't call that weekend. She worked her hospital shift, her calf shift, her weekend hours at a grocery store stocking shelves. She studied for her pharmacology exam until her eyes burned. She visited her mother and pretended everything was fine, pretended she wasn't drowning. And on Monday morning, when Matteo walked through the calf door at 6 a.m. sharp, she was waiting with his espresso already made. I'll do it, she said before he could speak, but I have conditions. Matteo's lips curved into a genuine smile, transforming his face from intimidating to devastating. I expected nothing less. Tell me, no funny business. This is a professional arrangement. I'm there to help your father, nothing else. Agreed. If your father figures out I'm monitoring him medically and objects, I walk. No guilt trips, no pressure. Agreed. And if at any point this arrangement interferes with my studies or my ability to graduate, I walk. No questions asked. Agreed. Matteo extended his hand across the counter. Do we have a deal, Julia? She hesitated for only a second before taking his hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not crushing, and the moment their skin touched, something electric passed between them. Matteo felt it too. She saw it in the slight widening of his eyes, the way his fingers tightened just a fraction before releasing. Friday at 6 p.m., he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. I'll send a car for you. Bring enough clothes for the weekend, and whatever study materials you need. The estate has a library you can use. Okay. Julia's voice came out breathier than she intended. Friday at 6. Matteo picked up his espresso, but instead of moving to his usual table, he paused. Julia? Thank you for trusting me. And then he was gone, leaving her standing behind the counter with her hand still tingling from his touch, and the distinct feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple caregiving job. Friday evening arrived faster than Julia expected. She'd worked her morning calf shift, attended her afternoon classes, and now stood outside her apartment building with a borrowed weekend bag and a stomach full of nervous butterflies. The car was exactly as promised. A sleek black sedan with a driver who opened the door without speaking and drove through the city with practiced efficiency. Julia watched the neighborhoods transform through the window. Urban sprawl gave way to manicured suburbs, then to genuine countryside, rolling hills and ancient trees lining roads that probably had names instead of numbers. The Costa estate appeared like something from a movie. Wrought iron gates opened onto a tree-lined drive that curved toward a villa that managed to be both historic and immaculate. Warm stone, arched windows, terraced gardens even in December's grip. This wasn't wealth. This was legacy. Matteo waited on the front steps, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. Dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look more intimidating than the expensive suits. You came, he said, and she heard genuine relief in his voice. You seemed surprised. I thought you might change your mind. Matteo took her bag without asking, gesturing toward the house. Come, I'll introduce you to my father, and then show you your room. The interior was exactly what Julia expected. Old money elegance, art that was probably priceless, furniture that had been in the family for generations. But there were personal touches too. Photographs on side tables, fresh flowers in vases, the scent of cooking from somewhere deeper in the house. It felt like a home, not a museum. Papa, Matteo called, leading her into a sunlit sitting room. Our guest is here. Antonio Costa sat in a leather armchair by the window, a book open in his lap. Reading glasses, perched on his nose. He was older than Julia expected, maybe 70, with silver hair and Matteo's same intense eyes, though softened by age and illness. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. So, you're the girl who's been making my son smile at 6 in the morning, Julia. Yes? Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. Antonio, please. Sir makes me feel ancient. He closed his book, setting it aside. Matteo tells me you're studying nursing. Admirable profession. My late wife was a nurse. Did he mention that? He didn't. Julia glanced at Matteo, who was watching the interaction with barely concealed tension. She was fierce, Antonio continued, his eyes distant with memory. Terrifying when she wanted to be. She would have liked you, I think. You have that same look. The one that says you don't suffer fools, but you'd fight God himself, for the people you love. Giulia felt her cheeks flush. I don't know about that. I do. Antonio's gaze sharpened, focusing on her with sudden intensity. My son brought you here to babysit me, didn't he? To make sure I take my medications and don't overexert myself, and generally behave like a good patient. Matteo tensed. Papa, don't insult the girl's intelligence, Matteo, or mine. Antonio looked back at Giulia, his expression amused. Here's the truth, Cara. I had a stroke. It was bad. I'm recovering, but recovery is slow and frustrating and makes me want to do stupid things to prove I'm still capable. My son worries. He hired you because he thinks you won't feel like a warden. Giulia appreciated the honesty. Would you like me to leave, Mr. Costa? Antonio. And no. He leaned back in his chair, smiling. I like you already. You didn't try to deny it or make excuses. You asked what I wanted. That's rare. Stay. Help me prove to my son that I'm not going to drop dead any minute, and in exchange, I'll give you peace and quiet to study, access to a library that would make your professors weep with envy, and the best food you've ever tasted. Sophia's cooking alone is worth the weekend. Relief flooded through Giulia. That sounds fair. Excellent. Now go, both of you. I'm reading, and I don't need an audience. Antonio waved them away with affectionate dismissal. Dinner is at 7. Don't be late, or Sophia will hunt you down. Matteo led Giulia through corridors lined with family portraits and ancient tapestries, up a curved staircase to the second floor. I'm sorry, he said quietly as they walked. I should have prepared you better for my father's directness. I liked it, Giulia admitted. It's easier when people are honest. He likes you. I could tell. How? He made a joke. He only does that with people he trusts. Matteo stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, pushing it open. This is your room. Private bathroom. Desk if you need to study. View of the gardens. Everything okay? Giulia stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. The room was beautiful, spacious, decorated with the same understated elegance as the rest of the house. The bed alone was bigger than her entire apartment's sleeping area. It's too much, she said. It's a guest room. In a palace. Matteo smiled, that devastating transformation again. It's a villa, not a palace, and you're here to work, not be a guest. Speaking of which, he pulled a small leather journal from his pocket, handed it to her. My father's medication schedule, his physical therapy routine, warning signs I need you to watch for. The physical therapist comes Tuesday and Thursday mornings, but weekends are unsupervised. That's when he's most likely to push himself too hard. Giulia flipped through the journal, her nursing training automatically cataloging information. Blood pressure medications, anticoagulants, physical limitations, dietary restrictions, all meticulously documented in Matteo's precise handwriting. You've been managing this yourself? She asked. For 6 months. While running a company and trying to keep him from realizing how terrified I am of losing him too. Matteo's voice cracked slightly on the last word, and suddenly, Giulia saw past the controlled exterior to the exhausted sun underneath. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. You're doing a good job. Your father looks healthy, he's in good spirits, and he clearly adores you. That's not nothing. Matteo covered her hand with his, and the electric feeling from their first handshake returned. Stronger this time. Thank you, he said softly. For being here. For helping. They stood like that for a moment, connected by touch and mutual understanding, until Giulia's nursing instincts kicked in and reminded her that boundaries mattered. She pulled back gently. I should unpack. Get oriented before dinner. Of course, Matteo stepped into the hallway, his mask of control sliding back into place. I'll be in my study if you need anything. Third door on the left. He left, and Julia sat down on the impossibly soft bed, trying to process everything that had just happened. She was in a billionaire's villa, hired to care for his father, feeling things she absolutely should not be feeling for her employer. This was going to be complicated. Dinner was an education in the Costa family dynamics. Antonio held court at the head of the table, telling stories from his youth with dramatic flair and impeccable timing. Sophia, the housekeeper who'd been with the family for 40 years, served courses of food so exquisite that Julia wanted to weep, and Matteo, seated across from her, watched his father with barely concealed vigilance, tracking every movement, every bite, every sign of fatigue. Matteo, stop looking at me like I'm about to expire into my pasta, Antonio said, spearing a piece of braised lamb with perhaps more force than necessary. I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm annoying everyone with my stories, which means I'm exactly as I should be. You also skipped your afternoon medication, Matteo said quietly. Antonio's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He looked at Giulia. Did you tell him that? I haven't checked your medication schedule yet, Mr. Costa. Antonio, Giulia corrected quickly. That was already his information. Antonio set down his fork, sighed. Fine. I skipped it, because it makes me dizzy. Happy? No. Matteo's jaw tightened. You can't just decide which medications to skip, Papa. Dr. Moroni was very clear. Dr. Moroni is not the one taking 6 pills that make me feel like I'm underwater. Antonio's voice rose, frustration breaking through his earlier good humor. I'm recovering, Matteo. That doesn't mean I'm broken. The tension at the table became thick enough to cut. Giulia saw Matteo's hands clench around his wine glass, saw Antonio's defiant expression, and recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't about medication. This was about control, about dignity, about a father and son both terrified of losing each other, but too proud to say it. May I make a suggestion? Giulia's voice cut through the tension, calm and professional. Both men looked at her. The dizziness you're experiencing is likely from the blood pressure medication interaction with your anticoagulant, she said, addressing Antonio directly. There's a time-release version that might help, or we could adjust when you take it to minimize the side effects. But skipping it entirely isn't safe. The stroke risk is real. Antonio studied her for a long moment. You're very direct. I don't see the point in being anything else. You're an intelligent man who understands consequences. You don't need me to baby you. You need me to help you find solutions that let you live your life without unnecessary risk. And if I decide the risk is worth taking, then I'll respect your choice and make sure Matteo understands it's your choice, not a failure of care. Giulia met his eyes steadily. But I'll also make sure you're making an informed choice, not one based on frustration or pride. Silence. Then Antonio laughed, a genuine belly laugh that transformed his face. Dio mio, Matteo. You found a good one. Don't let her go. Matteo's expression was unreadable, but his eyes when they met Giulia's were warm. I don't plan to, Papa. The rest of dinner passed more easily. Antonio agreed to discuss medication adjustments with his doctor. Matteo visibly relaxed, and Giulia felt herself settling into the rhythm of the household in a way that felt natural. Right. After dinner, Matteo walked her through the evening routine. Antonio's vitals check, medication administration, ensuring he didn't attempt the stairs alone, simple nursing tasks, but done in a home setting rather than a clinical one. You were right, Matteo said as they stood outside Antonio's room later that night. He needed someone who treats him like a person, not a patient. He's a good man, Julia replied. "You're lucky to have him." "I know." Matteo's voice was soft. "I almost lost him. When he had the stroke, I was in a business meeting. I didn't answer his call because I was too busy negotiating a merger that doesn't even matter now. By the time I got to the hospital, he stopped, swallowed hard. I almost lost him because I was too busy." Julia's heart ached for him. "But you didn't. He's here. He's recovering. And you're doing everything right to make sure he stays healthy, because I can't lose him." Matteo looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same fear she'd carried for years about her own mother. "He's all I have left." Without thinking, Julia reached out and took his hand. "You're not going to lose him. Not if I can help it." Matteo's fingers tightened around hers. They stood in the hallway, hands clasped, and Julia felt the air between them shift, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. "I should let you study," Matteo said finally, though he didn't release her hand. "You mentioned an exam coming up, pharmacology. Monday morning." "I really should study. The library is 2 floors down. No one will disturb you there. Thank you." Julia reluctantly pulled her hand free, already missing the warmth of his touch. "And Matteo? Thank you for trusting me with your father. Thank you for giving me a reason to sleep at night." The words hung between them, intimate and honest, before Matteo stepped back and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Julia standing alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that this job was going to change everything. The weekend passed in a rhythm that felt both foreign and comfortable. Julia monitored Antonio's health with professional care while genuinely enjoying his company. He was sharp, funny, deeply kind beneath his gruff exterior. They played chess, discussed literature, argued good-naturedly about Italian politics, and Matteo was always there, hovering at the edges, watching with that intense focus that made Julia's skin prickle with awareness. Sunday evening, as Julia packed her bag to return to her cramped apartment, Antonio called her to his study. "Sit, Cara," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I want to talk to you." Julia sat, suddenly nervous. "Is something wrong? Are you feeling?" "I'm fine. Stop nursing me for 5 minutes." Antonio smiled to soften the words. "I want to talk about my son." "Oh. Mr. Costa." "Antonio. And before you try to deflect, let me say what I need to say." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Matteo hasn't looked at a woman the way he looks at you since his wife died." Julia's breath caught. "He was married?" 5 years. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. Antonio's voice was heavy with old grief. Matteo blamed himself. He was supposed to pick her up that night but got stuck in a meeting. She took a cab instead. Wrong place, wrong time. Pure chance. But he's carried that guilt ever since. Suddenly so much made sense. The control, the vigilance, the fear in Matteo's eyes when he talked about his father. "I'm sorry," Julia said softly. "I didn't know. He doesn't talk about it. Won't even say her name." Antonio sighed. "But I see him watching you, and I see something I haven't seen in 3 years. Hope. Interest. Life. So I'm asking you, as a father who loves his son, don't break his heart. If you're not interested, tell him now. If you're using this job for money and nothing else, that's fine. But be clear. He's been hurt enough." Julia's throat tightened. "I would never. I know. I can see that. You have a good heart, Julia. That's why I'm having this conversation. Because I think you care about him too, and I wanted you to understand what you're walking into." Before Julia could respond, Matteo appeared in the doorway. "The car is ready. Julia, if you're—" He stopped, seeing them together. "Am I interrupting?" "No," Antonio said smoothly. "Just telling Julia she's welcome back any time. You'll come next weekend, yes?" Julia nodded, grateful for the out. "If you'll have me. Always." The drive back to the city was quiet. Matteo sat beside her instead of taking his usual seat in front, and the proximity in the back seat felt both thrilling and dangerous. "My father likes you," he said finally. "That's rare. I like him too. He's wonderful. He told you about Elena." It wasn't a question. Giulia turned to look at Matteo, saw the tension in his jaw, the careful blankness in his expression. "He mentioned you'd been married. I'm sorry for your loss. It was 3 years ago. Grief doesn't have a timeline." Matteo's eyes met hers, surprised. "No, it doesn't." They fell silent again, but it was comfortable now, an understanding passing between them. When the car pulled up outside Giulia's building, Matteo walked her to the door despite her protests. "Thank you," he said, standing on the cracked sidewalk that felt worlds away from the Costa Villa. "For this weekend. For helping my father. He hesitated. For being you." Julia's heart hammered. "I'll see you next Friday. Earlier. I'll still come to the cafe. Need my morning espresso?" "Of course you do." Creature of habit. Matteo smiled and stepped closer. For a moment, Julia thought he might kiss her. Hoped he might. But instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Buonanotte, Giulia." Buonanotte. She watched him return to the car, watched it disappear into the night, and only then allowed herself to touch her hand where his lips had been, feeling the warmth still lingering there. This was definitely going to be complicated. Monday morning, Matteo appeared at the cafe at his usual 6 a.m., but something had shifted. He watched her differently now. Less guarded, more openly warm. When she brought his espresso, their fingers brushed deliberately. When he left, he pressed another absurd tip into her hand, along with a note. "You passed your exam. I could tell from your smile." And he was right. She had passed. Top of her class. The weeks fell into a pattern. Weekday mornings at the cafe, filled with brief exchanges and lingering glances. Friday through Sunday at the villa, caring for Antonio while Matteo worked from his study. Joining them for meals, sitting with Julia in the library while she studied. They talked. About everything and nothing. About his work, her studies, his childhood, her mother's illness. About Elena, haltingly at first, then with more ease as Julia simply listened without judgment or pity. Antonio watched it all with knowing eyes and never commented, though sometimes Julia caught him smiling. It was the 5th weekend, late Saturday night, when everything changed. Julia had been studying in the library, surrounded by pharmacology textbooks and notes, when she heard raised voices from upstairs. Antonio and Matteo, arguing. She took the stairs 2 at a time and found them in Antonio's room. "You can't make these decisions for me," Antonio shouted, his face dangerously red. "Papa, please, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I'm 70 years old. I've had a stroke, and I'm tired of being treated like I can't make my own choices." Julia assessed quickly. Antonio's blood pressure was elevated, his breathing rapid. Dangerous for someone post-stroke. "Both of you stop," she said firmly, stepping between them. "Antonio, sit down, now." To her surprise, he obeyed. She checked his pulse, his color, timing his breathing. "What happened?" "He wants to go to the opera," Matteo said through clenched teeth. Opening night at La Scala. 3 hours sitting in a crowded theater. Late night. Stress. "It's La Scala," Antonio interrupted. "I've had season tickets for 40 years. I'm not missing Tosca because my son thinks I'm made of glass." Julia looked between them, saw the fear in Matteo's eyes, the defiance in Antonio's. "Can I speak with you?" she asked Matteo. Privately, they stepped into the hallway. Matteo leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair with barely controlled frustration. "He's being reckless," Matteo said. "He's being alive." Giulia kept her voice gentle but firm. "Matteo, I understand you're scared. I understand you want to protect him. But wrapping him in bubble wrap isn't protecting him. It's suffocating him. And if something happens, if he has another stroke in the middle of the opera, then we'll handle it. The same way we'd handle it if it happened here at home." She touched his arm, making him look at her. "You can't control everything. You can't prevent every possible bad outcome. All you can do is make sure he lives the life he wants to live while he can." Matteo's eyes were anguished. "I can't lose him. I know. But you're going to lose him anyway, Matteo. Eventually. We all do. The question is whether he spends his remaining time doing things that make him happy or doing things that make you feel safe." The words landed hard. Matteo flinched, then slowly nodded. "You're right. I know you're right. You're scared. That's okay. That's human." Giulia stepped closer. "But let me do my job. Let me be there to monitor him, to watch for warning signs, to make sure he's safe while he lives his life. That's what you hired me for, remember?" Matteo looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into an embrace so sudden and tight that Giulia gasped. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for being the person who makes me see clearly even when I don't want to." Giulia wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling his heart racing against her chest, breathing in the scent of him, expensive cologne, and something uniquely Matteo. "We'll go to the opera," she said softly. "All three of us. And it will be wonderful. And Antonio will have the time of his life. And everything will be okay. Promise?" "I promise to do everything in my power to make it true." Matteo pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to cup her cheeks. "Giulia." Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by Antonio clearing his throat from the doorway. "Are you two finished making eyes at each other? Because if Giulia says I can go to the opera, I need to call for tickets before they sell out." They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Giulia's face flamed. Matteo actually laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Yes, Papa. Call for tickets. 3 seats." Antonio's smile was triumphant. "Excellent. And Giulia? You'll need a proper dress. La Scala has standards." Before Giulia could protest about costs she couldn't afford, Matteo said, "Already handled. There's a boutique in the city that will send options to the villa tomorrow. Choose whatever you like. I can't. You can. And you will." Matteo's tone left no room for argument. "Consider it a work expense. You're representing the Costa family at La Scala. You should look the part." The opera was everything Antonio promised, and more. The dress Giulia chose was a deep emerald silk that made her feel like someone else entirely. Someone elegant, sophisticated, worthy of standing beside billionaires and royalty. Matteo's reaction when he saw her descend the villa stairs made the unfamiliar discomfort of high heels worth it. "Tesoro," he breathed, using an Italian endearment he'd never used before. "You're stunning." Giulia's cheeks flushed. "It's the dress." "No, it's you." Antonio made an approving noise. "Elena would have loved you, Giulia. You have her spirit." The words should have been awkward, but they felt like a blessing. La Scala was magnificent. Giulia had never been to the opera, had never experienced anything like the soaring voices and dramatic staging and sheer emotional power of Puccini's tragedy. She cried during Vici d'Arte, couldn't help it, and when she looked over, Matteo was watching her instead of the stage. His expression so tender, it made her breath catch. During intermission, while Antonio held court with old friends in the lobby, Matteo pulled Giulia aside. "Thank you," he said, "for convincing me. He's having the time of his life. He deserves it. So do you." Mateo's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Julia, I know this is complicated. I know there are professional boundaries, power dynamics, 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea, but I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting. One more time, Julia whispered, remembering the title that had started all of this, the promise of intensity and surrender. Mateo's eyes darkened. What? Nothing. I feel it too. Whatever this is. Then come with me. He led her through corridors she didn't know existed, upstairs to a private box that overlooked the stage. The music was already beginning again. Tosca's final tragedy unfolding below. But Mateo wasn't watching the opera. He was watching her, his intensity making Julia's skin prickle with awareness. I loved my wife, he said quietly. I will always love her. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and for 3 years I've felt like I was just existing, not living. Until you walked into that cafe and made me remember what it feels like to want something, to hope for something, to feel alive. Julia's heart raced. Mateo, I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm not even sure I'm ready for whatever this is. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see a future again. And it terrifies me as much as it thrills me. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Tell me this is just a job. That you don't feel this too. And I'll step back. I'll be professional. I'll never cross this line again. Julia knew she should say exactly that, should establish boundaries, protect herself, remember that she was his employee, that this could end badly in so many ways. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, testing. But then Mateo made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer, and the kiss transformed into something desperate and consuming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julia whispered, I've wanted to do that since the morning you left your business card. Mateo laughed, pressing his forehead to hers. I've wanted to do that since you argued with me about taking my tip. They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other, until the sound of applause from the theater below reminded them where they were. We should get back, Julia said reluctantly. Your father will wonder. My father knows exactly where we are and what we're doing, Mateo said with amusement. Why do you think he sent us to check on something that didn't need checking? Julia laughed despite herself. Subtle. He's never been subtle a day in his life. Mateo kissed her once more, gentle and sweet. Come on, Tesoro. Let's go watch the rest of the opera and pretend we're not going to spend the whole time thinking about each other. That's going to be difficult. Yes, but worth it. The next morning, Julia woke in her room at the villa to find a note slipped under her door. Meet me in the workshop. 3rd building past the gardens. M. She dressed quickly, nervous and excited, and followed the path through the estate's grounds to a converted barn that served as Mateo's private workshop. Inside, she found him standing at a workbench, covered in sketches and architectural models, looking rumpled and perfect in worn jeans and an untucked shirt. You have a workshop, she said, surprised. I studied architecture before I took over the company. This is where I come when I need to think, to create something with my hands instead of just signing contracts. Mateo looked up, his eyes warm. I wanted to show you. This part of me that not many people see. Julia walked through the space, running her fingers over tools and half-finished projects. These are beautiful. They're therapy, a way to feel like I'm building something that matters, not just managing money and power. She picked up a delicate model of a small building, all flowing lines and natural materials. What is this? A community health clinic. Something I've been designing for the past 2 years. Free medical care for underserved neighborhoods, staffed by volunteer doctors and nurses, funded by the Costa Foundation. Matteo came to stand beside her. I thought maybe, when you graduate, you might want to be part of it, if you're interested. Giulia's throat tightened. You're building this? For real? Construction starts this spring. It's been my secret project. Something I'm doing because Elena would have loved it. Because my father taught me that money means nothing if you don't use it to help people. And because he turned her to face him. Because I want to build something beautiful in this world. And I can't think of anything more beautiful than making healthcare accessible to people who need it. Matteo. Giulia's eyes filled with tears. This is incredible. Be part of it. Work with me. Not as my employee, but as my partner in this. Help me make it real. I'm still in school, I know, but in 6 months you won't be. And when you graduate, I want you to have choices. This can be one of them. No pressure, no obligations, just an option. Giulia kissed him, pouring every ounce of admiration and affection and hope into it. I'm absolutely doing this, she said when they came up for air. This is exactly what I've always wanted to do. Matteo's smile was radiant. Good, because I'm going to need a head nurse who's brilliant and compassionate and not afraid to argue with billionaires. They spent the morning in the workshop, Matteo explaining his vision, while Giulia contributed ideas from her nursing experience. It felt natural, easy, like they'd been working together for years instead of weeks. It felt like a partnership. It felt like a future. The next 3 months passed in a blur of studying, working, and falling deeper into something that felt terrifyingly close to love. Giulia spent every weekend at the villa. Antonio's health improved steadily, and more importantly, his spirit thrived. They went to concerts, art galleries, his favorite restaurants. Giulia monitored his health, but she also became his friend, his chess opponent, his companion. And Matteo was in her life in ways she'd never expected. He attended her study sessions, helping her prepare for exams, even though he knew nothing about nursing. He surprised her with coffee at the cafe on her longest days. He talked to her about his architectural designs and listened when she shared her dreams about community healthcare. They were careful around Antonio, but not secret. He knew, watched them with approval, and occasionally made pointed comments about wedding planning that made them both blush. But they also took it slow. Matteo was still healing from Elena's death, still learning how to open his heart again. Giulia was focused on graduation, on building her career, on keeping her mother's health stable. What they had was patient, careful, built on friendship and respect as much as attraction. It was real. Then graduation day arrived. Giulia walked across the stage to receive her nursing degree, wearing a smile so bright it hurt. Her mother sat in the audience, crying happy tears. And in the back row, trying to be inconspicuous and failing completely, sat Matteo and Antonio. After the ceremony, they all went to dinner. Giulia's mother, the Costa men, Sophia, who insisted on coming, and a few of Giulia's classmates. It was loud and chaotic and perfect. I'm so proud of you, Cara, Antonio said, raising his wine glass. To Giulia, who worked harder than anyone I've ever known and never gave up. You're going to change lives. Here, everyone chorused. Later, when the celebration wound down and goodbyes were said, Matteo drove Giulia home. But instead of dropping her at her apartment, he parked and killed the engine. Walk with me? They strolled through a nearby park, spring flowers blooming in the warm evening air. Matteo was quiet, thoughtful, and Giulia sensed something building. I want to show you something, he said finally, pulling out his phone. He opened a photo, architectural plans for a small house. This is for you." Julia's breath caught. "What?" "The clinic will have staff housing, small apartments for nurses and doctors who work late shifts, who need a place to rest between rotations. But I designed one unit differently, bigger, with space for family, for a life outside work." He looked at her. "I designed it for you, if you want it." "Mateo, I can't. You can." "The clinic opens in 3 months. I'm offering you the head nurse position, full salary, benefits, and housing. But more than that," he took her hands, "I'm offering you a partnership. In the clinic, in my life, in building something that matters. I'm not asking you to move into the villa. I'm not asking you to give up your independence. I'm asking you to let me be part of your journey, while you're part of mine." Julia's heart felt too big for her chest. "You designed a house for me. I designed a home because you've shown me how to build a life again, not just manage an existence. And I want to build that life with you, Tesoro. If you'll let me." She kissed him. There in the park, with the stars coming out overhead and the scent of flowers in the air. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, to all of it. The job, the partnership, the life. Yes." Mateo pulled her close, held her like she was precious and irreplaceable. "I'm going to make you so happy," he promised. "You already do." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, before Mateo pulled back with a mischievous smile. "There's one more thing." "What?" "My father has been making pointed comments about grandchildren. I thought you should be warned." Julia laughed. "Of course he has. He likes you better than me at this point. It's actually offensive. I am pretty wonderful." "Yes." Mateo's expression softened. "You are, and I'm the luckiest man alive that you took a chance on a ruthless billionaire with control issues and a broken heart. You're not ruthless. I can be. In business. But not with me. Never with you." He kissed her forehead. "With you, Tesoro, I'm just a man who wants to build a beautiful life with someone who makes me believe in tomorrows again." 2 years later, the community health clinic opened to overwhelming success. Julia ran the nursing program with efficiency and compassion, mentoring young nurses the way she wished someone had mentored her. Mateo split his time between the Costa corporate offices and his workshop, designing affordable housing projects and community centers, using his wealth to build rather than just acquire. Antonio celebrated his 75th birthday with a party at La Scala, healthy and vibrant, surrounded by family and friends. And Giulia, standing in the home Mateo had designed for her, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She'd been working double shifts to cover a staffing shortage, studying for her nurse practitioner certification, and managing a secret that made her both terrified and thrilled. Mateo found her sitting on the edge of their bed, looking pale. "Tesoro, what's wrong? Are you sick?" Julia looked up at him, this man who'd shown her what it meant to be loved completely, who'd built her a home and a career and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I need to tell you something." Concern flashed across his face. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. I'm pregnant." Mateo went completely still. "What?" "I'm pregnant. 10 weeks. I found out this morning. I know we talked about waiting, about my career, about timing, but..." She didn't get to finish, because Mateo dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands shaking as they covered her still, flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby. Are you happy? I know this wasn't planned. Happy?" Mateo looked up at her with eyes full of tears. "Tesoro, I'm terrified and thrilled and so deeply, completely happy, I can't breathe." "We're having a baby." Giulia's own tears started falling. "We're having a baby." Matteo pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a mother. My father is going to lose his mind with joy. He's been dropping hints for months. He's going to be insufferable." Matteo laughed through his tears. "And I'm going to love every minute of it." They stayed like that, holding each other, until Giulia yawned so widely her jaw cracked. Matteo immediately shifted into protective mode. "You need rest. Let me. I'm fine, just tired. The first trimester is exhausting. Then I'm putting you to bed." "Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. I'm the father. Close enough." He scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her to the bed. "Rest, Tesoro. I'm going to take care of everything. Matteo, I'm going to call my father, and Sophia, and probably wake up half the household staff because I can't keep this quiet even if I tried." Giulia laughed, settling into the pillows. "Go. Tell everyone. Just come back. Always." He kissed her, tender and sweet. "Rest now. You're growing our miracle." As he left the room, already pulling out his phone, Giulia heard him say, "Papa, I have news. You're going to be a grandfather." And then Antonio's joyful shout echoed through the phone. Giulia smiled, placed a hand on her stomach, and felt the future unfold before her like a gift. She'd started this journey exhausted, running on empty, convinced she had to do everything alone. And somewhere along the way, a ruthless billionaire with espresso dark eyes had shown her what it meant to let someone share the weight, to build something together instead of always struggling alone. She'd stopped running long enough to catch her breath, and she'd found home. 3 days later, Antonio summoned them both to the villa for an important discussion. When they arrived, he was in his study, looking uncommonly serious. "Sit, both of you." They exchanged worried glances and obeyed. Antonio studied them for a long moment, then smiled. "I'm not dying. Stop looking panicked. I just have something I want to discuss before my grandchild arrives." Relief flooded through Giulia. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about legacy, about what matters, about what I want to leave behind." Antonio pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. "These are the papers for the Costa Family Foundation. I'm restructuring it, putting you both in charge." Matteo's eyes widened. "Papa, let me finish. You, Matteo, have shown me what it means to use wealth responsibly. The clinic, the housing projects, all of it. And you, Giulia, you understand what it means to struggle, to fight for dignity, to know the value of health care and opportunity." He leaned back. "Together you can do more good than I ever did. So I'm handing over control of the foundation. 5 billion euros, invested and growing. Use it wisely. Build things that matter. Help people like Giulia's mother, who need medication they can't afford. Support nurses and doctors who want to serve underserved communities. Make the world better for my grandchild." Giulia couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. Matteo stood, walked around the desk, and embraced his father. "Thank you, Papa. We'll make you proud. You already do." Antonio patted his son's back, then looked at Giulia. "Both of you. Now go, make plans, dream big. And Giulia, thank you for giving my son his life back, for giving all of us a reason to hope again." That night, lying in bed with Matteo's hand resting on her stomach, Giulia thought about the journey that had brought her here. From exhaustion to rest, from loneliness to family, from barely surviving to building a legacy. "What are you thinking about?" Matteo asked sleepily. "That morning in the cafe, when you first came in. Best decision I ever made, following that espresso. I almost didn't take your business card, but you did. And here we are. Here we are." Giulia turned to face him. building a family, running a foundation, creating a future. Together, Matteo emphasized. That's the important part. Together. He kissed her, slow and sweet, then whispered against her lips, "One more time, Tesoro?" Julia smiled, remembering the title that had started all this, the promise of intensity and surrender. "One more time," she agreed, "and then 1,000 more after that. Promise?" Promise. And as they came together in the darkness, building their future one moment at a time, Julia finally understood what the competitor's script had known all along. The best love stories aren't about grand gestures or dramatic conflicts. They're about finding someone who sees you completely, accepts you wholly, and chooses to build something beautiful with you. One day, one choice, one act of love at a time. 3 months later, Antonio held his granddaughter for the first time and cried. 6 months after that, the foundation opened its 10th community clinic. A year later, Julia finished her nurse practitioner degree, while Matteo designed a network of affordable childcare centers for healthcare workers. And 5 years after that morning in the CAF, Julia stood in a packed auditorium, receiving an award for healthcare innovation. With Matteo and their 2 children, and Antonio in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. She'd stopped running. She'd found home, and it was more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul. Because sometimes, the greatest romance isn't about passion or drama. It's about finding someone who whispers one more time when you're exhausted, who builds you a home when you're lost, who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself. And that kind of love, that's the kind that changes everything.